Just got back from dinner with my friends Fett and Nancy. They're from Nashville. Fett doesn't have a last name. Never uses it anyway publicly.
That's a subject of another video.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that some other time.
Anyway, he runs an awesome studio in Nashville called Azalea Music, and I've sent many, many taxi members to him and have heard nothing but wonderful things over the years. And so at dinner tonight, we're talking about pre-production. What should a band or artist do before they go into the studio? As a retired engineer myself, I remember that people used to come in and almost write the songs in the studio. Do you have any great basic rules for people, things they should do before they come in?
Sure. In the old days, people used to spend the studio sort of as a laboratory. And nowadays, if you're going to somebody else's studio, it's just not cost effective anymore if you don't have a label or somebody like that behind you. And there's two things that I find people don't do a lot of, and that's decide things like tempos and keys and just basic things like that, and maybe lay down a little bit of a drum loop or something like that, you know, as a pre-produced track to start from. But the other thing they don't do is rehearse. A lot of times people will put all this effort into making sure that they've got the lyric right and work on the songwriting part of it and everything else, and make sure that the tone is right on the electric guitar for the solo and what have you. And they'll do all that in advance, but they won't actually get together as a group of people and rehearse. And then they get into the studio environment, it's real sterile or it's real intimidating for them, and they find that they're not loose enough because they haven't worked with the material to actually get a good take, and they can end up spending twice as long to get something down that they could have done much, much faster if they just rehearsed in advance.
What advice would you have for somebody who's a songwriter or an artist that's going to use session players, that they might call you and say, Fett, can you get me bass player, drummer, guitar player, and a keyboardist? They don't know these people. They're walking into a room cold, meeting these people for the first time. The pros are all seasoned pros. How does somebody who's not a seasoned pro themselves and not used to working with seasoned pros, how do they build that relationship and make it work?
Well, that's a really good question, because one of the things I tell people about the studio business when you're working with session players, it's all about balance. You want to be able to let the people that you've hired do what they're best at doing. So you have to have a little bit of confidence to kind of let go and hand it over to them. If you allow the bass player and the drummer, for example, to kind of go off in a corner and work out a little something between the two of them, they'll probably come up with a better result than if you say to them, I want you to do it exactly this way. So you have to reach that balance between letting go and let them do it, and having enough control to know when to speak up to say, I really like that idea that you're coming up with over in the corner, but it's really taking my song in a different direction. And the way you do that is be prepared in advance. Learn how to write charts. It's one thing I tell people all the time. If you're going to work with
does anybody still write charts?
Absolutely. In Nashville, for example, everything is done in the Nashville number system. And the Nashville number system forces you, as the songwriter, to think about the song the way that the session players does, in terms of the structure of the song, how it's laid out, how many measures each section of the song is, so that everybody's literally on the same page. The way the Nashville number system works, the drummer, the bass player, the producer, engineer, everybody uses exactly the same copy of the same chart. So it's not like you have the drum chart and the piano part, the piano chart and the bass chart. They're all one chart, and you get this common language. So you're kind of thinking about the song the way a session player does at that point. It's a great way to get prepared.
How do they not feel ganged up on? Let's say it's somebody from Indiana that comes to Nashville and uses your studio because they want an authentic Nashville demo, which is probably a smart idea. How do they develop that trust? You were talking about balance. How do they know that these guys aren't just going, yeah, whatever, you know, let's phone it in, let's just take this poor schmuck's money because they're getting back on the plane to Indiana tomorrow. How do they know when to trust their gut versus trusting the pros?
It's two things. It's being able to listen to the radio or whatever it is you're trying to pitch towards, maybe other CDs, that kind of thing, and know what style, what sounds like you're trying to go for. And we're not talking about, I want it to sound exactly like this hit by this person that's on the chart right now, but I want it to sound like a certain flavor of music, a certain style, and be able to describe that in subjective terms. And the other thing is to have somebody in the organization, meaning the people at the studio among the session players, to be your collaborator. And that's normally the producer or the studio owner. If they're providing a really good demo service or they're providing a really good, say, indie CD service, that person is the one that helps keep you not get ganged up on. That person should talk to you in advance. You should have a lot of phone calls and emails back and forth so you're totally in each other's head. And you understand what the common vision is for the music that you want. So that person can say to the band, that's a great idea to turn this thing into a heavy metal song, but it was actually supposed to be bluegrass. We'd rather you take it in this direction now and put away the electric guitar, bring out the mandolin, and let's do this. But that's an advanced preparation issue. You've got to find that person, and it could even be one of the musicians in the group.
Right.
As the
Somebody's gotta be the
designated
leader.
leader, you get a good rapport going with that person, but it's all about preparing in advance and knowing that stuff before you go in there.
You and I were having lunch in Nashville a few weeks ago, and we were talking about a situation where a taxi member met somebody at the road rally, a really well-known producer engineer guy that I think you and I both have a tremendous amount of respect for. And ultimately, the taxi member was very disappointed with the result. They called me up complaining because they met this person at the road rally. And it was easy for me as a retired engineer producer to see what went wrong, and what happened was what you just described.
Mm-hmm.
This guy showed up and it was, well, do it my way, do it my way, do it, this is what I hear, do it my way. But he didn't know how to engineer, he didn't know how to produce, he didn't know how to relate to the session player. So what he ended up with was exactly what he asked for, and then realized it wasn't very good and held it against the engineer.
Right.
It's a trust thing. It's like if you're going to get brain surgery tomorrow, you don't go in and tell the brain surgeon how to cut your head open. How does that person know to trust you?
Well, sometimes it takes more than once. Every now and then you've got to actually try the process more than one time. And what I tell people, it's a little hard when you have a budget in mind, but I tell people is don't go in with any expectations. And what I mean by that is, if you've never been to a studio before, you've never done a demo or a CD with a bunch of musicians and engineers and what have you, go in assuming that it's not going to be the last time you're there. So it takes all the pressure off. So you may work on a couple of songs, and that's the other thing. Don't do the whole thing in one go. That'll really help you make sure you don't, go down the wrong path too far. But go in with no expectations at all and say, I'm going here this time around to learn about the process. I'm going to try it this way, knowing that I always have the option to try it again. And you might need to go through a couple of studios or a couple of different groups of musicians before you find the right one. But if you go in with that in advance, 90% of the time it's going to end up being what you want anyway.
It's great advice. What's your website so people can go? Do you have more information on your website that might be helpful?
www.azaleamusic.com. That's A-Z-A-L-E-A.
Or as I like to say,
music.com.
Azalea.
As do many people, actually. You can call it anything you want as long as you go there.
Thanks a lot, Fett. See you guys soon in Nashville.